She walked into my restaurant on a Thursday night in October, and the first thing I noticed was that she still walked the same way, not fast, not slow. Like she had decided exactly where she was going and had made peace with every step it would take to get there. I was behind the pass, checking a plate of redfish before it went out, and I looked up because the front door had opened and the warm New Orleans night had come in with it. That particular thick sweetness of the French Quarter in fall, jasmine and rain and something frying 2 blocks over. And then I saw her, Diane, 10 years. 10 years, and she walked in like time was something that happened to other people. Her natural hair was grown out now, a full crown that caught the candlelight from the tables and held it. She was wearing a dark dress, simple, the kind of thing she always chose. Nothing that asked for attention and everything that commanded it anyway. She stopped just inside the door and looked around the room the way you look at a place you used to know, checking what had changed and what hadn't. Then she looked at me. I don't know how long we stood like that. Long enough for my sous chef to say my name twice before I heard him. I set the plate down. I walked out from behind the pass for the first time in a service in 11 years of running this kitchen. I walked to the front of the house, and I stopped 3 feet from the woman I had not seen since she left. And she looked up at me with those dark eyes I had spent a long time trying to forget. And she said, "I used to be your wife." I didn't answer right away. I looked at her for a long moment, the way you look at something you're not entirely sure is real. Then I said, "I know who you used to be, but let me take you back. Because 10 years is a long time and none of it started on a Thursday night in October. It started 20 years before that, on a Sunday morning in the Treme, with a woman who laughed too loud at a second-line parade and didn't apologize for it once. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 43 years old and I own a restaurant called Maison Webb on Chartres Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana. It seats 62 people. It has a bar that my grandfather built with his own hands in 1967. And on any given Friday night, there is a 2-hour wait, and I am in the kitchen the entire time, because I don't know how to be anywhere else. Grew up in the 7th Ward. My mother cooked like it was a form of prayer, and my father ate like it was a form of worship, and somewhere in between those two things I decided food was what I was going to give my life to. I went to culinary school in New York. I came back because New Orleans is the only city in the world where the food actually tastes like the place it came from, and I wanted to cook that. The real thing. The thing that has memory in it. I met Diane Celestin at a second-line parade on a Sunday in October when I was 23, and she was 20. And she was wearing a yellow dress and dancing with her eyes closed, and she didn't care at all who was watching. I watched for a long time before she opened her eyes and caught me looking and said, without missing a beat, "You gonna stand there all day or you gonna dance?" I danced. I was bad at it. She laughed that too loud laugh and taught me something that day. And we were inseparable for 6 years after that, and married for 4 of them, and then she was gone. I don't say it to make her a villain. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman who had wanted things she couldn't find a way to want, and also stay. She was a photographer, serious and talented, the kind who won grants and got her work shown in galleries and was always being asked to go somewhere else to do it. São Paulo, London, Nairobi. And she went, because that was who she was, and I stayed, because that was who I was. And for a long time we told ourselves that the distance was just geography and love was bigger than geography. And then one day it wasn't anymore. She left on a Wednesday. She didn't take much. She said she was sorry in a way that I believed completely, and that helped not at all. I stood in the doorway of the house. We had shared on Esplanade Avenue and watched her get into a cab and felt something close in my chest that didn't open again for a very long time. I put everything I had into the restaurant after that, not as a coping mechanism, or not only as a coping mechanism, because the work was real and the food was real, and the people who sat at those tables and closed their eyes after the first bite of something were real. And when everything else had gone uncertain, that realness was the thing I could hold on to. Maison Webb opened 4 years after Diane left. It was successful faster than I had any right to expect, which I think had something to do with grief. People cook differently when they're trying to say something they don't have words for. Whatever I was trying to say, the city heard it. I didn't date for 2 years. Then I dated carefully, briefly, the kind of relationships that were honest about being what they were. There was a woman named Patricia, who was a school teacher and kind and patient, and deserved better than a man who was still, in the most fundamental way, not entirely present. We parted well. I was grateful for her and sorry about what I couldn't give her. I stopped trying after Patricia. Not bitterly, just honestly, Some people are built for the kind of love that stays still long enough to be lived in. I had been that kind of person once with Diane. And when she left, she had taken the version of me that knew how to do it, or so I thought. On a Thursday night in October, 10 years after she left, Diane Celestin walked back into my restaurant. I took her to a table in the back. Not the best table, not the worst. The one by the window that looked out onto the courtyard where my grandfather's olive tree still grew, improbably, in the middle of the French Quarter. I sat across from her, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. She said, "The restaurant is beautiful, Marcus." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I heard about it. People told me." I looked it up online. I saw the reviews. I said, "What are you doing in New Orleans, Diane?" She looked at her hands. She had a camera bag over her shoulder, the kind she always carried, worn leather strap, the buckle slightly bent from years of use. She said, "I came back." "I'm back," I said. For how long?" She said, "I don't know yet. Maybe for good. My mother isn't well. And I've been moving for a long time. I'm tired of moving." I looked at her across the table with the candlelight between us and the sound of the kitchen behind me and the olive tree outside the window. And I felt something shift in my chest in a way I wasn't prepared for. Not anger, not grief, something more complicated than either. Something that had been very still for a long time and had just moved. I said, "Are you hungry?" She looked up. She said, "Yes," I said. "Then let me feed you." I went back to the kitchen and I cooked for her the way I hadn't cooked for anyone in years. Not the menu, not what was selling. I made her the things that were ours. The stuffed mirliton her grandmother used to make that I had learned to replicate after 3 years of trying. The catfish court bouillon we used to eat on Sunday nights when we were broke and happy in our little apartment on Frenchman Street. The bread pudding with whiskey sauce that I had made for her birthday every year of our marriage. I sent it out one dish at a time. I stayed in the kitchen until service was over, and then I sat down across from her again and she looked at me and her eyes were wet and she said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I know," she said. "Marcus," I said, "Don't." She stopped. She looked at the table. Then she looked back up at me and said, "I know I don't have any right to be here. I know I gave that up. I'm not here to ask for anything," I said. "Then why are you here?" She was quiet for a long time. The restaurant had emptied out around us. My staff were doing their closing work, quiet and efficient, giving us the space that people give you when they can see something serious is happening. The olive tree moved slightly in the courtyard. Somewhere on Chartres Street, someone was playing a trumpet. She said, "Because I have been in 37 cities in 10 years, and I have never once stopped thinking about this one." And I have been honest with myself about a lot of things in those 10 years, and the most honest thing I know how to say right now is that the biggest mistake I ever made was letting this city go. And you were the city to me, Marcus. You were always the city to me. The trumpet on Chartres Street played something low and slow. I sat with her words for a long moment. Then I said, "That's a heavy thing to say to someone after 10 years. She said, "I know. I'm sorry. I've been sitting outside for 45 minutes trying to decide if I was going to come in at all." I said, "What made you come in?" She said, "I could smell the kitchen from the street, and it smelled like something I used to know, and I couldn't walk away from that." I looked at her, the woman who had taught me to dance on a Sunday morning in the Treme, the woman who had left on a Wednesday with a small bag and genuine sorrow, the woman who had been in 37 cities and had come back to this one and sat outside my restaurant for 45 minutes before walking through the door. I said, "Come back tomorrow. For dinner, not like this. Come as a customer. Sit at a proper table and eat a proper meal and let me think about what I want to say to you." She stared at me. She said, "You want me to come back?" I said, I want one night to think. 10 years without a word and you come back on a Thursday. Give me until Friday." She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. She stood up and picked up her camera bag and looked at me one more time and said, "The food was extraordinary, Marcus." It always was. She left. I sat at the empty table with the olive tree outside the window and the sound of my staff finishing up around me, and I thought about what she had said. The city to me. You were always the city to me. I didn't sleep that night. I walked instead. I did what I always did when something had unsettled me enough to make the restaurant walls feel too close. I walked the quarter and then up into the Marigny and along the river, and back through the Treme, the neighborhood where I had grown up, where my mother's house still stood on St. Bernard Avenue, with the same iron gate my father had painted green every spring. I walked past the spot where I had first seen Diane dancing, eyes closed, yellow dress, not caring who was watching. I thought about the version of myself that had stood in that doorway on Esplanade Avenue watching the cab drive away and felt something close in his chest. I thought about 37 cities and the smell of a kitchen from the street. By the time the sun started coming up over the river, I had made a decision. Not about Diane specifically, about myself, about the version of me that had decided after Patricia that he was not the kind of person who could do this anymore. I had been living inside that decision for 6 years. And grief is not a good architect. Friday came. Diane came back at 7:30 in a dark green dress this time, and she sat at the table by the window that looked out onto the courtyard. And I sent out the menu, the real menu, the food I made every night for strangers. And I watched her eat it from the past the way I watched every table, reading the way the food landed, the way the body responded to something that was made right. After service, I sat down again. I said, "I have some things to say, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She folded her hands on the table and looked at me steadily, and nodded. I said, "When you left, something in me decided it was safer to stop. Not to stop working or stop living, but to stop hoping for the particular thing you were. And I built something good inside that decision. I want you to know that. I built something I'm proud of. I am not a man who has been waiting for you." She held my gaze. She didn't speak. I said, "But I am also a man who walked the city last night for 4 hours and ended up standing on the block where I first saw you dancing. And that tells me something I can't pretend it doesn't tell me." She said, "What does it tell you?" I said, "It tells me that what I closed off was not the capacity. It was just the willingness. And those are different things." Her eyes were very bright. I said, "I am not offering you anything tonight. I am not taking anything back, and I am not starting anything new. What I am saying is that I am willing to find out what is true, slowly, honestly, with both of us understanding what the stakes are." She said, "I'm not going anywhere, Marcus. I need you to know that's real. I have a lease, 3 months renewable. I have a studio in the Bywater. I am not going to São Paulo or London or anywhere else. I am here," I said, "then be here. Come back next Friday. And the Friday after that. Come as someone I am getting to know again, not someone I already know, because 10 years means we don't actually know each other anymore. And I need that to be true between us before anything else can be." She looked at me for a long time. The olive tree moved in the courtyard. She said, "You're a harder man than you used to be." I said, "I'm a more honest one." She said, "I deserved that." I said, "You deserve the truth. That's all that is." She reached across the table and rested her hand on mine for just a moment, not claiming anything, not asking for anything, just acknowledging that something had happened tonight that was real. She said, "Friday." I said, "Friday." The Fridays came. 6 of them, each one a little longer, a little closer, a little more honest than the last. We talked about the 10 years the way people talk about a place they've both been but separately, comparing what they saw, finding the places that overlapped and the places that didn't. She told me about São Paulo in the rainy season and Nairobi at dawn and a winter. In Oslo, that had made her understand, for the first time, that she had been running toward light without realizing she was running away from home. I told her about the restaurant opening, about the night we served our first full house and I stood in the kitchen at midnight afterward and didn't know who to call. We didn't rush. I had meant what I said about that. There was something between us that needed to be rebuilt rather than resumed, and rebuilding is slower work than resuming, but it is more honest. On the 7th Friday, she came in with her camera. She said she had been working on a project about the city, the real city, the one underneath the tourist surface, and she had something she wanted to show me. I sat with her after service and she showed me the photographs, the city I grew up in, seen through her eyes. An old man sitting on a stoop on St. Claude Avenue with a look on his face that contained entire decades. A group of children running through a fire hydrant on a street I recognized from my childhood. A woman hanging laundry between 2 shotgun houses with the kind of efficient grace that comes from doing something your whole life. I looked at the photographs for a long time. Then I looked at her. I said, "You never lost it." She said, "I was afraid I had. I was afraid I had spent so much time moving that I had stopped being able to see the thing that was still." I said, "You see it." She said, "I see it better here than anywhere." I reached over and closed my hand around hers. Not briefly, the way she had touched my hand on that first Friday. For real, the way you hold something you have decided to hold. She looked at me. I said, I am not the same man you left. The man you left would have let you come back without asking you to prove anything. Because he loved you so much, he would have taken whatever piece of you was available. That man doesn't exist anymore. She was very still. I said, the man I am now needs the whole thing. Needs the version of you that has stopped running. Needs to know that this city is where you are choosing to be, not just where you have landed. And if that's what this is, then I am willing to find out what we are now, not what we were. What we are, her eyes filled. She said, I chose to be here, Marcus. I chose it the moment I walked through that door on a Thursday night and said something. Embarrassing about being your wife, I said. It wasn't. Embarrassing, she said. It was a little. Embarrassing, I said. It was honest. She laughed. The too loud laugh I had heard for the first time on a Sunday morning 20 years ago at a second-line parade in the Treme, and had never once forgotten. It filled the empty restaurant the way it had always filled every room she was in, without apology, without calculation, entirely itself. I pulled her toward me. She came without hesitation. I held her the way you hold something you thought you had lost and found again in a form more real than the memory of it. And outside on Chartres Street, the city was doing what it always did, being itself, loud and warm and indifferent, to anything as small as two people finding each other again in a room that smelled of spices and old wood and everything that had been given and taken and given back, she said into my shoulder. I'm sorry it took me so long. I said, you came back. She said, I came back. I said, then we start from here. Outside, the trumpet on Chartres Street was playing again, something slow and certain in New Orleans, the kind of music that knows it will outlast everything that is temporary, because it always has. 6 months later, Diane's photographs were hanging on the walls of Maison Webb, not as decoration, as the thing they were, a record of the city that had made us both, that we had left and come back to in our different ways, that had held the space between us for 10 years without complaint. People asked about them. Where did you find this photographer? I said she found me. That was true enough. One evening in January, a cold one by New Orleans standards, she came in with a large envelope and set it on the table and said, I want to show you something. Inside the envelope were prints. The restaurant. Not the polished version. The kitchen before service, the steel surfaces and the mise en place and Jerome chopping something with focused efficiency. The dining room at the end of a long night, the candles burned low, 2 glasses with wine still in them. The courtyard at dawn with the olive tree and gray morning light, and one of me. I hadn't known she took it. I was behind the pass looking down at a plate, and the expression on my face was one I had never seen in a photograph of myself before, not the professional focus I wore during service. Something more private than that. Something that was happening underneath the work. I looked at that photograph for a long time. She said, you don't have to use it. Any of them. They're yours. I made them for you, I said. Diane. She said, what? I said, you see me. She said, I've always seen you. I just wasn't always here to show you what I saw. I reached across the table and took her face in both my hands. The way you hold something you understand is irreplaceable. And I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had danced with her eyes closed on a Sunday morning and left on a Wednesday and come back on a Thursday and stood outside my door for 45 minutes before walking through it. She looked back at me with those dark eyes and didn't look away. I kissed her. Not the first time since she came back, but the first time it felt like a beginning rather than a continuation. Like something choosing to start rather than picking up where it left off. Because we were not picking up where we left off. We were somewhere new, built from the same materials but constructed differently, with the knowledge of what had happened the first time, and the choice to try again anyway. She put her hands over mine. She kept her eyes open. Outside, the olive tree stood in the January courtyard, the same tree that had been there when my grandfather built the bar in 1967, that had stood through the decades and the storms and the changes and the losses and was still there, still producing, still making something from the soil of this particular city that could not be replicated anywhere else. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About a Sunday morning in November, 5 months after she came back, when we went to a second-line parade in the Treme. It was the same neighborhood. Not the same block, but close enough. The brass band was playing something that started low and built slowly, the way the best music does, the way the best things do, without announcing themselves, just arriving and being undeniable. The street was full of people moving the way people move in this city when the music tells them to, which is to say, without self-consciousness and without apology, and with the full understanding that this is what the body is for. Diane was in a yellow dress. I don't know if she did it on purpose. I never asked. Some things are better left as what they are, which is either a coincidence or a gift, and either way you receive them the same. She was dancing with her eyes closed. I stood and watched her for a long moment. 20 years had passed since the first time I stood like this, watching her, not yet knowing that this woman was going to be the central fact of my life. 20 years and she still moved the same way, like she had made an agreement with the music and was honoring it completely. She opened her eyes and caught me watching. She said, "You going to stand there all day, or you going to dance?" I laughed. I felt it start in my chest and come all the way up, the kind of laugh that surprises you, the kind that means something has released that you had been holding for a long time. I said, "I'm still bad at it." She said, "I know. I'll teach you again." I stepped forward. She took my hand. The brass band played something that climbed and didn't come down, and around us the city was doing what it always did, being entirely, stubbornly, magnificently itself. I was bad at it. She laughed. That too loud laugh that I had first heard on this street 20 years ago, and that I intended, God willing, to keep hearing for the rest of my life. She had walked into my restaurant on a Thursday night and said she used to be my wife. She was wrong about that. She had always been. In the 10 years of silence in the 37 cities and the 45 minutes she spent standing outside my door before she came in, she had always been. The way this city is always itself, no matter what gets built over it or washed away or lost and rebuilt, she had always been. And on a Sunday morning in November, in the Treme, with the brass band playing something that refused to come down, and the yellow dress and the eyes closed dancing and the too loud laugh, she always would be.